often told that 97 to 98% of climate scientists agree that human activity is warming the planet. But then you turn on the news and see a prominent politician say that statistic is based on one discredited study. So who's right? If the vast majority of experts agree, why does it feel like a 50-50 debate? Welcome to the podcast. I'm Dr. Mack, and this is the Climate Translation. Before we talk about the numbers, we need to talk about the word itself, consensus. In science, a consensus isn't just a group of people agreeing because they like each other. It's what happens when the vast majority of specialists in a field agree on a basic principle because the evidence has become so overwhelming that it's no longer worth arguing about. We live our lives by scientific consensus every day, often without realizing it. It's agreed that the Earth orbits the Sun. We accept that tadpoles grow into adult frogs. Almost all geologists agree that plate tectonics is a reality, and you'd be hard-pressed to find a doctor who still thinks that smoking is harmless. Now here's the catch. None of those examples, not even the Earth orbiting the Sun, have 100% agreement. You can always find an outlier. There's always someone who's willing to take a contrarian stance. Sometimes it's for personal belief, and sometimes it's for more complicated reasons. Humans are naturally skeptical, and in science, that's actually how progress works. We argue, we test, we peer review a hypothesis until it survives enough interrogation to graduate into a theory. But when we reach a point where the vast majority of experts stop arguing about the basics, we call that a consensus. It's the point at which the data has spoken loudly enough that we can move from asking, is this happening, to, well, what do we do about it? That brings us to the clickbait soundbite that came out of Washington a few years back, the one study claim. It's often reported that somewhere between 97 to 98% of climate scientists agree that humans are the main driver on the rapid climate shifts we're seeing on the planet. Yet politicians continue to dispute this. One stated that the idea that there is consensus is based on just one discredited study, and that statement was covered in all the major news outlets. As an educator, this is a light bulb moment waiting to happen. If the consensus were a house of cards resting on a single academic paper, well, I'd be skeptical too. But the truth is, the house is built on a foundation of many major independent studies. The first major effort to measure this consensus didn't even look at scientists' opinions, but at their actual work. In 2004, a scientist named Naomi Oreskes surveyed 928 scientific papers on global climate change and found that not a single paper rejected the consensus position that global warming is man-made. In 2009, a study by Dorn and Zimmerman asked 3,146 Earth scientists a simple question. Do you think human activity is a significant contributing factor in changing the mean global temperature? While 82% of all Earth scientists said yes, that number jumped to 98% among actively publishing climatologists. In contrast, only 77% of non-climatologists who weren't publishing research agreed. In 2013, Dr. John Cook and his colleagues at the University of Melbourne analyzed over 12,000 peer-reviewed scientific papers and found that 97.1% of those taking a position agreed that humans are causing global warming. To be even more transparent, they asked 1,200 of the original authors to rate their own papers, and those scientists reported a 97.2% consensus. And in 2021, in a massive study of 88,125 climate-related papers published since 2012, researchers found that the consensus now exceeds 99% in peer-reviewed literature among the subset of confirmed climate experts with the highest level of expertise, meaning they have individually published more than 20 papers. The agreement reached 100%. So when you hear there's no consensus, or that it's based on one discredited study, remember that those numbers aren't just a snapshot. They're a result of thousands of experts reviewing tens of thousands of papers over several decades. The consensus gap isn't a lack of scientific agreement. It's a gap in how that agreement is communicated to the public. In my classes, I often tell my students science is a team sport, but the media loves a solo superstar. And that's where this consensus gap gets dangerous. It's what happens when one of those outliers becomes a celebrity that everyone latches onto to justify their viewpoint. I experienced this firsthand many years ago. I was working on a research grant to create a series of events at a major aquarium on the Gulf Coast. The goal was to have an open discussion with the public about the intersections of climate, weather, and human health. But before I took over the program, the guest scientist they brought in was just such a celebrity skeptic. Now, the expert they tapped was a credentialed scientist. At the time, he was a professor and the state climatologist for one of the Gulf Coast states. But he was a pioneer of what I call alternative science. Back in 1989, he and his colleagues used satellite data to claim the Earth wasn't warming at all. Even though later reassessments by the Bush administration and other scientists found significant errors in his work, the damage was done. He had become a celebrity for the skeptical camp. He is who they turned to when they wanted someone to back up their viewpoints. Working with him was incredibly difficult. We disagreed on almost everything. While the vast majority of his scientific peers were looking at a mountain of evidence, he was teaching that human-induced climate change was a hoax. And because he had a doctor in front of his name and a prestigious position at a university, he provided what political leaders call scientific cover. This is the heart of the problem. When you have one scientist who tells people what they want to hear, that they don't have to change their lifestyle or worry about the future, that one voice can muffle the 98% who are telling the difficult truth. In the 90s and 2000s, this wasn't just a coincidence. There was a deliberate battle plan created by fossil fuel interests and free market think tanks to recruit these new faces to add their voices to the debate. They knew if they could manufacture a celebrity skeptic, they could create the illusion that the science was up for debate, and that allowed them to avoid costly changes to their business plans due to national and state laws and regulations. That scientist was charismatic, too. People bought into his message because he was articulate and likable. It didn't matter he was an outlier, and that he had been caught manipulating data. As an educator, seeing that muddled message at the aquarium was heartbreaking. People weren't leaving with a better understanding of the environment, they were just leaving confused. And in the world of climate change, confusion is as good as no for those who want to prevent action. So how do we make sense of a world where 98% of experts are in agreement, but the outliers are the most vocal and charismatic speakers in the room? How do you cut through the noise when the person telling us it's all fine sounds much more certain than the scientist talking about ranges of probability? We have to recognize that this is the classic consensus gap. In science, a consensus is reached by people who have spent years learning how to work with complex data and identify what constitutes actual evidence. Public consensus, on the other hand, usually only happens when something is blindly obvious, like the existence of owls because we can see and hear them. Climate change is more complex, and that complexity makes it a target for misinformers. When a celebrity skeptic stands up with credentials and a smile, they're often providing what people are looking for, a reason to ignore the problem. It's a powerful psychological shield, but it's one that has been carefully manufactured by interest groups to delay action. So, given this, how do you take this information and actually use it in a real conversation with a friend, a family member, a colleague who is latched on to these vocal outliers? Well, first, acknowledge the trust factor. Don't start attacking them or their intelligence. Start by acknowledging that we all defer to experts because none of us has the time to learn everything. Say, I understand that you'd listen to that scientist. They sound convincing. It's natural to trust an expert. You can use the doctor comparison. This is the most effective translation for the 98% consensus. Ask them, if you were seriously ill and 98 doctors told you that you needed a specific surgery, but 2 told you you'd be fine, would you bet your life on the 2? Even if one of those 2 was a celebrity doctor featured on podcast and the television. Highlight the expertise variable. Explain that the debate isn't scientist versus scientist. It's experts versus non-experts. Imagine if you noticed a large crack in the foundation of your house. You're worried the whole building might be shifting, so you ask for advice. You have 10 neighbors. They're all handy with tools. They've built decks and fixed sinks. 8 of them say, yeah, that looks like a structural problem. But 2 of them say, don't worry about it. Houses just settle. That's an 80% consensus, but you're still confused because 2 neighbors seem really confident. So you call 10 licensed general contractors. These are people who build houses for a living. This time, 9 of them tell you it's a serious foundation issue. Now you're at 90%. The signal's getting clearer. Finally, you decide to bring in 10 structural engineers who specialize only in soil science and foundation failure. They spend every single day studying exactly why dirt shifts under concrete. All 10 of them look at your data and tell you the same thing. Your foundation's failing and you need to get it fixed now. That is 100% consensus. This is exactly what we see in climate science. If you ask scientists in general, you'll get a high number. But as the level of active research and specialization in climate science increases, so does the agreement that humans are the primary driver. Finally, expose the false balance. Help them see that the media often creates an unbalanced perception of reality by giving 2 to 3% of skeptics over half the airtime. When we try to be balanced, we often actually end up being inaccurate. The goal isn't to win the argument. It's to help your friend or family member realize that they might be looking at a very small slice of the pie and mistaking it for the whole meal. When we close this consensus gap, we move one step closer to actually understanding and maybe even fixing the world we live in. Thank you for joining me for this episode of The Climate Translation. My hope is the next time you hear someone say, there's no consensus, you don't feel overwhelmed. Instead, I hope you feel that you have something in your toolkit to help bridge that gap. If you found today's analogies helpful, I'd love for you to share this episode with someone. Maybe that one friend who's always sending you links to alternative science. Let's start building those bridges one dinner table conversation at a time. I'm Dr. Mack. If you have a question about the climate you've been too afraid to ask, or if you have a differing opinion, I want to hear from you. I can use your viewpoint in a future episode. You can reach me at theclimatetranslation@gmail.com. I'll see you next time.